Morning, it's about 8:30 on Thursday morning, and I'm doing my walk and talk. I haven't done my walk and talk for a while. I've been super busy with lots and lots of things, but today I felt compelled to do a walk and talk about the tube strike and why we should actually be glad there's a tube strike and why we should be supporting the tube strike. So I'm actually walking from Victoria Station to Euston. It's going to take me about 35-40 minutes. Normally I would have probably got the tube, but I don't mind walking today. So I stopped at Oxford Circus to chat to three guys from the RMT who are striking today. I asked them a simple question of why they're striking, and just listening to those guys actually made me realise that for a lot of people life is tough, and we get this kind of message fed to us that, well, tube trade drivers, they earn £60,000 a year and they get all these benefits and they only work a certain number of hours. Well, that's a failed argument in my opinion, because surely firstly we would want tube drivers to be paid decent money. Surely we wouldn't want unskilled workers driving trains with thousands of people on them, so we'd want them to be paid a decent salary. We'd also want them to have decent working conditions so that they get enough sleep and they have enough rest in between shifts so that they can actually drive trains safely. They spend a lot of time stuck in a cab underground, and you could say, well, they could always do other jobs. Well, we want tube drivers, and we want tube drivers that work as well. So what they're facing, I've got their literature here. The actions, they say, is a response to an impact of £4.2 billion cuts programme imposed by the government and the Mayor of London. Well, let's just analyse that, shall we? We've just seen a budget where there's going to be £12 billion worth of benefit cuts. There's going to be cuts, obviously, here to the London Underground and stuff. Yet, it's funny how we can offer a cut in corporation tax. It's funny how we can offer changes in income tax, which really, at the end of the day, are only going to affect a very small, tiny percentage of the wealthy elite, the establishment that run this country. So what's happening is, for example, 2008, world financial system was nearly brought to its knees by bankers. We, the taxpayer, bailed them out with our money, right? At the same time, they continued to pay themselves massive bonuses, and their actual earnings over that period since 2008 have actually escalated more and more. I think it's actually they earn 5 times now what they earned in 2008. So their money's gone up, no justice. No, they weren't brought to court for their part in it. They were bailed out by government money, which is our money. And then what happened now is George Osborne wants to sell some of those state-owned assets back to his chums in the city, because they are all chums, for a £13 billion loss. Almost similar to the figure that we're having to have more austerity. So what you've got now is socialism for the elite. So the elite, the establishment, live in this protected world where actually nothing really happens to them. They own the media. So for example, Murdoch and all the other people, all the other wealthy media moguls own the media. So they control the messages we receive. So we're constantly told about benefit cheats. Well, actually benefit cheating amounts to 1.2 billion per year. Corporate tax avoidance and wealthy individual tax avoidance amounts to about £80 billion a year, so almost 80 times that. But they're not vilified, they're not brought to justice, nothing done about them. And it's the same with the tube workers. So the tube workers are going to have to face working at night. Why we need a tube all night long, who knows? I'm sure Boris Johnson and the government won't be travelling on it at any time, or even in the middle of the night. So why do we need a tube in the middle of the night? They're cutting station staff, they're changing their terms and conditions with a fairly perfunctory consultation, in inverted commas. They're going to do it anyway. So I'm glad they're on strike, because we now have to start standing up for our rights in this country. We've had a lot of our rights taken away. David Cameron and his party are talking about, changing the Human Rights Act. Why do we need to have less human rights? Surely we want to have slightly more human rights. So all the time our freedoms are being eroded. Our taxes are being redistributed to wealthy individuals, not to us. So, for example, you've got privately foreign-owned utilities that make giant profits, and those profits go to their shareholders. You've got large corporations now able to employ people on very low wages, and then they have to be given tax credits, which are funded by us as taxpayers, right? So we pay the money to the government then take that money and give it in tax credits to those people so they can, in order to survive and live and eat. So what happens is large corporations get cheap staff funded by us as the taxpayers. Socialism. Rail companies, large rail companies in this country, all privatised, they only survive on huge state donations, huge state grants, right? And they take those state grants and what do? They don't invest it in the infrastructure, they don't invest it in the trains, they don't invest it in better conditions. What they do is they take that money and they redistribute it to their shareholders. Interesting that. So I think it's time that we all realise in this country and across the world that we're all being fed a crock of shit by the establishment through their media and through their politicians and everything else. And it's time we actually started supporting people like the tube workers and supporting their rights, because we're all going to be victims of it in some, or already all victims of it in some shape or form. You know, for example, 90% of all 4 unions voted for strike action. That's actually better than the Tories got in the government. In the elections, they only got 24% of the vote share of eligible voters. So, you know, just reading through this literature, you know, London Underground is cutting 850 jobs, leaving many stations dangerously understaffed. I spoke to one of these guys, ordinary guy working on the tube. He's now going to be faced with the prospect of having to work nights. He's married, he has children. When's he going to see his kids? How's he going to deal with childcare? None of these things are considered, because the people who actually impose these rules and regulations have nannies. They send their children to private schools. They have vast sums of money in order to manage these things. But for the average worker who's got to now face a massive change, imagine, you know, you go into work today and suddenly your boss says, oh, sorry, you're going to have to start working nights. And if you don't like it, hard luck. Well, that's not great, is it? You know, after all, people who work on the tube are human beings as well, yeah, like we all are. So if you get a chance, stop by one of the people and tell them, well done for striking, give them their support, because we need to be all in this together to take a stand now against the establishment, because the establishment are completely out of control and they're completely destroying our lives. And if you don't believe it, just have a read on some of the alternative things on the web. Don't just look at, you know, the newspapers and things like that. Start looking at alternative sources and see what's going on while we're all being distracted by, you know, benefit cheats and immigrants and terrorists and all sorts of other nonsense that's fed to us on a daily basis. So sorry about the angry rant this morning, but I think it's time some of these things get said. Anyway, enjoy your day, support the strike. Thanks.